Thank you for joining us. We have with us David Brog, who's a great friend of mine and a hero. David, you're really like one of the people who set me on this path, and everything that I'm doing now is really thanks to your book. I think it's right behind you, your book cover, Standing with Israel.
Yes, it is. It's up on the wall. Yeah,
One of your
I
many,
totally
yeah.
thank you so much. It's always meant so much to me every time you've graciously, shared with me the influence my book had on you, and it's been so great to see what you've gone on to do
I was a
with
rabbi in
your passion for
Columbus.
the.
I was a rabbi in Columbus, Ohio, and this was like even before the days of Amazon when you would get books in the mail. And I got a book in the mail called Standing with Israel, Why Christians Stand with Israel. And I didn't know anything about this topic, and I started reading this book, and it blew my mind. It blew my mind. So thank you, David, for articulating why Christians stand with Israel. At the time, you were the director of Christians United for Israel. Is that
Well, I actually wrote the book while I was still chief of staff for Arlen Specter, Senator Specter from Pennsylvania. And it was my interactions with Christians living in Pennsylvania that planted in me the curiosity to want to figure out why do so many of these Christians profess such heartfelt support for Israel and the Jewish people. And as you know, the typical response from our community was one of dismissal and skepticism. Um, but I grew ashamed of that skeptical response. I realized I was doing to these Christians who were telling me how much they loved Israel. I was doing to them the very thing so many generations of Christians had done to us. I was judging a faith I knew nothing about and people I did not know on the basis of a stereotype, on the basis of a rumor. So I was determined to get to the facts and figure out why do these Christians support Israel. And as you know, what I found, and I imagine this has been your experience as well, is it's for the best of reasons. It's for the same reasons an evangelical Christian who supports Israel does it for the same reasons an Orthodox Jew would support Israel. It's not the prophecies of the book of Revelation, it's the promises in the book of Genesis. And I think
right?
one promise above all, Genesis 12:3, he who blesses Israel will be blessed, and he who curses Israel will be cursed. So,
That's right.
so I wrote the book, and then I met Pastor John Hagee. And Pastor John Hagee, of course, if you write a book about Christian support for Israel in America, you have to write about Pastor John Hagee, and I did. But he approached me and said, "Boy, David, you know Washington, you know the Jewish community, you're Jewish, and you clearly understand us from your book, which I've read. Um, I've got this crazy idea. I'd like to create a pro-Israel Christian organization. Do you think you can help
Wow.
me?" And I was leaving the Hill at the time, had offers to go lobby for big companies or join big lobbying firms, and I made the decision to go to Texas and be the first employee of a new organization called Christians United for Israel when we had no money and no members. And it was the best decision I made. One of
Wow.
the great privileges of my life.
And under your tenure, you built up Christians United for Israel to millions of members, right? I mean, millions, and
Yeah.
they think now
I
there's 2
left a
million.
decade later.
Wow.
I left a decade after we started it. And when I left, we had 6 million members. And more importantly than that, we had accomplished the main goal that I saw CUFI accomplishing. When we started CUFI in 2006, people on Capitol Hill still perceived of Israel as a Jewish issue. And so people would say, hey, I don't have Jewish constituents in my district, I don't need to worry about Israel. And of course, Jews in America are largely on the coasts, big cities, New York, LA, and are a large majority Democratic, 75% Democratic. And uh, I saw a need to broaden the base of support for Israel and broaden recognition of that base. And the evangelical community was the obvious way to do it.
Yeah.
By the time I left in 2015, perceptions of the issue of Israel had shifted dramatically. Now everyone understood that this was not just a Jewish issue, but also an evangelical issue. And everyone has evangelicals in their district, whether it's New York, LA, or every congressional district in between.
Yeah.
And so, just for an example, when President Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem, he later commented that he did it for the evangelicals.
Yeah.
That, not the Jewish community, the evangelicals. That would have been unheard of when we started CUFI in 2006. But through our work and through organizing and expressing this Christian support, those perceptions shifted, and I now think, better reflect the reality that this is something that tens of millions of Christians care and care deeply about. And so that was a great thing we accomplished, and I was very happy at that juncture to move on to my new challenge, leaving CUFI in excellent hands to continue their important work.
So, David, tell me about your transition to now decide to take all of the community building and all of the leadership that you developed in working in Washington and in Texas, and now that you're living in Nevada, you're running for Congress on behalf of Las Vegas, right? Tell us about that decision to go into politics.
Well, I moved to Las Vegas in 2015, to work with Sheldon and Mary Madelson in building an organization called the Maccabee Task Force. And the Maccabee Task Force focuses on fighting anti-Semitism and the demonization of Israel on college campuses. So I've been laser focused on college campuses for the last 7 years. And I've been arguing, with people and trying to build support for our work, two arguments. Argument number one, these attacks on Israel on campus are like every attack on Israel and Jews throughout history. It may start with Israel, it never ends with Israel. So I've been warning people who I'm trying to interest in our work that today they might be calling Israel racist. Today they might be calling Israel apartheid, but tomorrow they're going to be calling America racist. And they're going to say America is a great abuser of human rights. And unfortunately, that prediction came true very quickly and is now happening on our campuses throughout the country. The second thing I've been telling people is you can't ignore the campus. You can't say, well, that's the campus. These young people are going to graduate and get jobs and mortgages and become more reasonable. The ideas of the campus today become the ideas of our politics within a generation or two. And I've been arguing that. On that point, I was wrong. It hasn't taken a generation or two. The crazy ideas that dominate our college campuses have entered the political mainstream. It was really, for me, the summer of 2020, where we saw these crazy ideas of the campus climb over the ivy-lined walls of the campus and take over the centers of our cities. And the base of one of our two political parties, the base of the Democratic Party, is now controlled by woke progressives. And one thing I know from my political experience from working for Senator Specter is that the base of the party has inordinate power and influence over elected officials. So a lot of people would say, well, don't worry about the base. Nancy Pelosi is still pro-Israel and Joe Biden is still pro-Israel. And I was never satisfied by that. I always felt that they were going to inexorably follow the base. And we've seen this play out. Their instincts may be more moderate, but that's irrelevant. What they're doing is trying to placate this extreme base. And so all of a sudden, in my mind, what was the center of the ideological battle for the heart and soul of America in the West, the college campus, is now a bit tangential to what's going on at the heart of our democracy, Congress, in the way these dangerous ideas have taken over the Democratic Party and are now being implemented with terrible results for Americans. And we can go example by example, but defunding the police. Anyone who understands criminology understood that this would immediately result in a spike in violent crime. And by the way, spikes in violent crime and murder in the inner cities. The very people the defund the police protesters claim to care about are the very people now suffering the inevitable reaction to defunding and demoralizing our police and spiking murder and violent crime rates. Inflation. It's not all caused by the policy of the federal government, but it's been terribly exacerbated by the policies of the federal government. You cannot pump trillions of dollars in unnecessary money and push it into our economy. You can't print it and pump it into our economy and not expect it to fuel larger inflation rates. And that's exactly what's happening. And we can go on and on with these examples. So if I can be part of taking back the House in November, if I could be part of a Republican majority in Congress, then we can put a brake on the worst ideas and impulses coming out of the Biden administration. And that in and of itself would be a huge victory. We can stop them from doing further harm. It's like the Hippocratic Oath. We can stop the government from doing further harm. That in and of itself would be a great victory and a great honor. Then my hope is we move on from there to take back the White House in 24 and really begin to return our government to common sense and where it needs to be.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it seems like there's a lot of momentum. There's a lot of momentum right now, and there's so much on a domestic level. I mean, the news is out of control on a daily basis, and so I'm wondering about your district in Nevada. So tell us a little bit about your district. What's happening on the ground there? What are the issues that are important to your constituents, which has traditionally been a Democratic area, and why you're optimistic?
So I'm optimistic for two reasons. First of all, my district, which was a solidly a Democratic district, was redistricted in 2020. And it was made a much more of a swing district. So everyone thinks of Nevada's first congressional district as a Democratic district. And to this day, I have people saying to me, oh, you can't win in Nevada 1. What they fail to recognize is that through redistricting, this was reduced. Shut that up. This district was reduced to according to the Cook Political Report, +3 Democrat, which means it's essentially a swing district. And with generic ballots running +5 Democrat, +5 Republican, +8 Republican, it's clearly a district we can win in November. But then there's some things specific to my district that make me quite optimistic, in particular about Nevada 1. In Nevada 1, a lot of that +3 Democratic advantage is made up by Hispanic working people. And if you've looked at any of the polls recently, it shows Hispanics and Hispanic working people breaking for Republicans in greater numbers than ever. And so what looks like, if you freeze the frame based on old data as a majority Democratic district, I think if you incorporate this new data, you would see is going to break Republican. I've always argued that the Republican Party can and should be a working class party. I've always believed that the Republican Party and the conservative movement in general has to make the case to working class people in America. And so it's particularly exciting for me to be a candidate in this working class district at this time when I think we can, the dividing lines are stark. And I think we can show working people that we are the party that can best serve their interests. And a few obvious issues. Look at the price of gas at the pump. This was largely the result of bad Democratic policies. Anyone who knows the oil and gas industry knows that it takes a long time and a lot of money to take a lease and explore it and cultivate it and bring that oil to market. No company is going to invest that time or money if they believe that there is no future for their industry in this country. Every time, and just a couple of days ago, Biden did it again. Every time you signal that we want to get rid of fossil fuels and switch only to renewables, every time you beat in that you want to see the oil and gas industry and the exploration for fossil fuels end in America, you're sending a signal to these companies not to invest. And so we're suffering the inevitable reaction to all of the rhetoric coming from Biden and the Democratic Party. And we're seeing less investment in oil and gas exploration, less domestic production, higher prices. This can be reversed just by reversing policy, just by reversing our speech, just by reassuring the oil and gas industry that they have a future, that they're backed by government, that we intend to enable them to recoup the benefit of the significant investments they need to make. Look at inflation. Printing trillions of dollars and pumping it into the economy at a time when demand was already increasing, at a time when we were already facing inflationary pressures, was a foolish mistake, a mistake anyone who studied Economics 101 should have avoided. But this administration made. So just by reversing these policies, by refusing to print unlimited dollars, by refusing to pump unnecessary spending into the economy, we can improve the situation with inflation, which these are the two issues working people are most worried about. Final issue I'll throw out is our community, like so many communities across the country, is being hit with fentanyl deaths. You know, we look at the 4,000, 5,000 civilians killed in Ukraine, which is getting a lot of attention, as it should. And we're all upset by this terrible, tragic loss of life. What we never talk about enough in this country is the fact that last year, 107,000 Americans died from drug overdoses. And a full 2/3 of them, over 66,000, were fentanyl overdoses. That fentanyl is streaming across our unguarded and unprotected southern border. And this is a drug where you don't have to be a confirmed drug addict to die from it. We hear tragic story after tragic story of some unwitting young person not knowing the risk, saying, "Oh, sure, I'm at a party, I'll try some drugs. Oh, I want to fit in with the kids, I'll try these drugs." They end up dead. That kind of foolish mistake is not one you should pay for with your life. This is a tragedy in communities across the country. It's a tragedy in my district, and we can stop it just by enforcing our southern border.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
It's
these
interesting.
issues these issues will resonate with Democrats. They're going to resonate with Republicans in my district who will turn out in record numbers. They're going to resonate with independents in my district who are going to break Republican in much larger percentages than last election. But these issues will also resonate with working class Hispanic voters, working class voters across the board who are registered Democrats in my district. We're going to do better with them than in prior elections, and that's how we're going to win in November.
Well, let me ask you about the working class Hispanic community. How are they relating to your history with working on behalf of Israel? Is Israel an important issue to your constituents?
I'd say that it's an issue that resonates more strongly with conservatives in general and with evangelical Christians in particular than it does with many of those who are currently registered Democrat. So there are obviously exceptions there, and you find Democrat voters who do care about Israel and do want to support Israel, but I think it's less salient with them. That's why, of course, I'm running. I'm running as a candidate who's addressing the most important issues for voters. But I'm also being quite upfront about the fact that I intend to be a champion of Israel in Congress, and my constituents deserve to know that because that's what they're going to get when they elect me.
I know that a lot of efforts have been made, and probably by Christians United for Israel and others, to really cultivate strong relationships with the Hispanic community. And are you seeing that? Are you seeing that in the Hispanic community they are learning more about Israel and learning to respect and to even love Israel?
Well, the effort through CUFI tended to focus more on evangelical Hispanics and especially conservative leaning evangelical Hispanics, and we do see some of that in my district. We do have evangelical Hispanic evangelical churches, and love for Israel is part of the culture there. What I've seen, what we did less of with CUFI, and what I've seen less of in the district is connecting with the Catholic churches, and there I hope personally I'm able to make connections, and not just on the issue of Israel, but on so many of the issues where I think our values intersect,
Hmm.
and um, and demonstrate to them that I'm a candidate who takes, if these are people of faith, so to the extent they take their Catholic faith seriously, I think they're going to find in me a kindred spirit, someone who takes his Jewish faith seriously, and therefore, we have theological differences, and those differences may have a profound impact on one's view of salvation. But those differences are really irrelevant when it comes to policy and politics today. And here I think people of devout faith, be they Jewish, evangelical, or Catholic, actually share the same agenda, an identical agenda. And so I am hopeful that I can show them that I'm someone who's going to better represent their faith and their values in Congress than a Democrat who might actually be of their faith, but not share those values and not fight for those values in Washington.
Well, with Congress becoming increasingly, unfortunately, hostile to Israel, having you there would be such a blessing. And you would be the most equipped and the most knowledgeable congressperson on behalf of Israel. And so we wish you the best of luck in your primary. When is the primary?
So the primary is June 14th, and I tell people, Tuli, I'm not running to be a friend of Israel in Congress. We have a lot of friends. I'm running to be a champion of Israel, and this is what I've done with a lot of my career. I know the issue in depth. and I'm determined to focus on this issue and lead on this issue because I know Israel is a frontline ally. Israel is fighting our shared enemies on our behalf, and we are wise to make sure they are well equipped to win these battles over our shared enemies. So it's something I take very seriously and be very focused on. If I may make a shameless plug, Tuli, my website is Brog for Nevada, BROG for Nevada, and need all the help and support I can get in this final sprint before the primary.
Okay, Brog for Nevada, and thank you, David Brog.
Thank you very much, Tuli.